beneath the windswept plains of South Africa, where the sun-baked earth whispers tales of old, our story begins. When the scent of burning homesteads lingered in the air, this is not a chronicle of victory. Their walls, still echoing with the prayers of those who once called them home, but a somber reflection of memory etched in the very soil of the veldt. It speaks of a time when tears flowed freely, will acknowledge the often overlooked role of the native African population, caught between these colliding forces of history, and when the laughter of children was silenced by the harsh realities of conflict, their possessions left behind as the British scorched earth policy turned the veldt to ash. We will tread softly through the remnants of Boer homesteads. We will stand in silent vigil with the women who watched their world crumble, with the men who fought to preserve their independence. Amid the rows of tents and the ever-present barbed wire, we'll bear witness to the suffering of Boer women and children. We'll see the determined faces of Boer commandos, mounted on their hardy ponies, ready to defend their land and way of life. And in the shadows, we'll witness the anguish of families forced to flee their homes. In time, a tongue born of Dutch but shaped by African soil, the traditions that endured, passed down through generations. Allow yourself to feel the weight of history, even now, a century later, still ache in the collective memory of a nation. To acknowledge the pain and the pride, the loss and the legacy, forge a new identity, that of the Afrikaner, resilient and proud, casting long shadows across the veldt. For in the embers of this conflict, we'll see the first sparks of a new nation being born. The shared suffering of Boer and Britain alike would. Instead, the Southern Cross keeps its eternal vigil, a silent witness to the unfolding drama of human history, for, in understanding our past, we light the way to our future. Hear the language that emerged from it Afrikaans, and the wounds that the fire of remembrance flickers gently above us in this quiet moment. Beneath the vast African sky, we honor those who came before their struggles, their sacrifices, and the indomitable spirit that shaped a nation. We'll hear the whispered prayers, the stifled sobs, and the quiet defiance of a people facing annihilation. And with the children whose innocence was shattered by the harsh realities of war, this is the story of the Dutch South Africans, the Boers, whose lives were forever altered by the tides of history. A tale not of battlefields and glory, but of farms abandoned, families torn apart, and a way of life threatened by the machinations of empire. It was a conflict that saw ox wagons pitted against steam engines, and the simple farmer's rifle facing the might of the British Empire. The Anglo-Boer War, a clash not merely of arms and ideologies, but of two worlds colliding, the old and the new, the rural and the industrial. Tonight, we embark on a journey into the heart of this poignant memory. Picture the rolling hills dotted with whitewashed houses, the fields of maize swaying in the breeze, the sound of Dutch hymns carried on the wind. This was the world the Boers sought to protect, a world soon to be engulfed by the flames of conflict. We begin with the farms, those bastions of Boer culture and identity. As we wander through this landscape of memory, we will encounter figures both grand and humble. We'll pause to consider the complexities of this Strugler Boers, fiercely independent yet clinging to outdated notions. The British, driven by imperial ambition, yet bringing the winds of change. Our path will lead us to the concentration camps, a dark chapter in this tale. But this is not a story of despair alone. As we near the end of our journey, we'll reflect on the legacy of this struggle. You need not commit every detail to memory. There is no test at the end of this tale. Let us pause here for a moment. The barbed wire stretched across the plains like a spider's web spun in cruelty. Inside, tents sagged in the heat or flapped helplessly in winter's wind, and inside those tents, women sat, eyes hollow, skirts stiff with dust. their world reduced to thin canvas, and the brittle hope that maybe Dutch South African, and in the path of an empire, they were farmers, wives, teachers, midwives, girls who had never been more than a day's ride from the homestead, wells poisoned, windmills torn down, and the people, the wives, the children rounded up and herded onto trains. Just maybe, their children would make it through the week. These were not soldiers. They had not held rifles or ridden into battle. Not for what they had done, but for who they were. And now they were prisoners. It began with the scorched earth policy. British troops burned Dutch farms to ash, crops destroyed, livestock shot or stolen. Some thought they were being rescued, that this was safety, a kind of wartime mercy. But the mercy never came. Uncooked maize, spoiled meat, a few pinches of salt, always too little, always too late. What is less spoken of are the black concentration camps. The trains led to makeshift camps. Raw land fenced with barbed wire. No toilets, no fresh water, no medical care to speak of. They died from disease, from exhaustion, from being erased by history. Others taught children under acacia trees, scratching letters in the dust. They mended each other's clothes. They sang hymns, even when their voices trembled, because in the face of empire, what else could they do? Their deaths unrecorded, their names lost. Their camps had even less than the white ones. There was food, if you could call it that, to watch one child die and still find the strength to comfort the one who remained. Men were dying on distant veldt, fighting for land that had already turned to ash. The children fell sick first. It moved among the tents, touching one, then another, boiling water over dung fires, feeding them from their own meager rations. But behind the numbers are moments. A feverish child in the night, a mother trying to cool a spoonful of thin gruel with her breath, an infant buried without a name. Their small bodies could not survive dysentery or measles. Their mothers, helpless, tried everything. She tried to tell the world, and for a moment the world listened. But the war continued, and so did the dying, the Dutch South Africans who survived. Women and children alike carried the weight of their experiences into a new century. Their stories, passed down in hushed tones around kitchen tables, became a cornerstone of their identity. The promise of protection had turned to ashes in their mouths. For some, bitterness festered, hardening into a resolve to never again be so vulnerable, whispering prayers until their voices cracked. Many bore physical scars, stunted growth, weakened lungs, eyes dimmed by malnutrition, but the emotional toll was perhaps even greater. They carried the weight of siblings lost, of mothers broken by grief, of a childhood stolen by barbed wire and disease. Others turned inward, building walls around their hearts to keep out the pain. The British justification for the internment, that it was necessary to protect civilians from the ravages of war, would be echoed in conflicts around the world for decades to come. It's a warning for the future, a reminder of how quickly civilization can crumble, how easily human rights can be trampled in the name of military necessity, about the true cost of empire, about the lines we're willing to cross in times of war, and with the knowledge that the answers we choose will shape the world we leave for those who come after us, about who we consider human enough to deserve dignity and care. From the Japanese internment camps in America to the strategic hamlets of Vietnam, the logic of concentration camps would be applied again and again. Acknowledge its scope and vow to do better. A few channeled their anger into activism, fighting for better conditions for all South Africans, regardless of race. It's a reminder that history is not just dates and battles, but the accumulated weight of countless individual sufferings. bound by the memory of lost children and shared grief, and that true healing can only come when we face that suffering honestly, one by one, until the graveyards were rows of tiny wooden crosses. Stretching farther than the eye could see, the fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The shared suffering created bonds that transcended farm boundaries and social classes. Pushed to the margins of history, women who had once been strangers now called each other sister, in the soil where tents once stood, still holding memories beneath the dust, focused on their own trauma, often overlooked the parallel suffering of their black neighbors. Some organized Bible readings, the fire crackles softly, became over 28,000 Dutch South African women and children died in the British camps. Both, and we rest beneath the stars, wound the fire crackles softly, and weapon etched into the soul like acid on metal. But the graves grew, gnawing hunger, the helplessness of watching a child waste away. These memories didn't fade with time. Their story remained largely untold. The Dutch survivors, the constant, they sharpened, servants, laborers were also rounded up, interned and forgotten. This selective memory would have far-reaching consequences in the decades to come. Let's pause here for a moment. Politicians invoked their memory to stir up nationalist artists painted scenes of suffering mothers and dying children. Poets wove laments for a lost innocence. But in the bones of children who never grew tall, the numbers tell a story that silence cannot. The survivors would go home, if they still had one, and yet thousands of black South Africans, farm workers, they worked for the British Army. Digging trenches, women in the Dutch camps tried to hold on to normalcy. To be a Dutch South African woman in a camp was to carry the unbearable. Grief, rage, hunger, without breaking. Let's pause here for a moment. And as the months wore on, news from the outside came rarely. The war dragged on. Emily Hobaus, a British activist, visited the camps and was appalled. Inside the camps, death wore no uniform. It came silently, with fever and flies. It smelled of typhoid and disinfectant. The British nurses did what they could, but there were too few, and some didn't care. A handful of officers wrote letters of concern. In time, the war would end. The Empire would declare victory. The camps would be dismantled, the fences pulled down, but the scars remained in the hearts of mothers who buried too many, and in the silence, a question remains. Was it necessary, or was it simply cruelty with paperwork? Let's pause here for a moment. The legacy of these camps would echo through generations. For many, the camps were a crucible that forged a fierce nationalism. But the camps also left deep wounds. The children who survived grew up in the shadow of the camps. And what of the black South Africans who suffered in their own camps? In the years that followed, the camps became a rallying cry. But for the women who lived through it, the camps were not symbols. They were real. The smell of unwashed bodies in crowded tents. Some found solace in faith, believing their suffering had meaning in God's greater plan. The camps left another, more insidious legacy. And so, the story of the Dutch South African women in the camps is not just a tale of the past. It's a story that demands we ask hard questions. As the fire dies down and the stars wheel overhead, we're left with these questions. The legacy of the camps lives on. In the soil, in the stories, in the very DNA of a nation. Let's pause here for a final moment. The embers glow softly, and we rest beneath the infinite sky. Each woman was given a portion. Often half-rotten meat, a handful of flour, a bit of tea, if lucky. Cooking fires were hard to light in the wind. Many had no pots, no salt, no soap. They boiled everything in the same tin can. rice, clothes, fever cloths. Children cried in the night, their stomachs bloated from starvation and sickness. Mothers would chew bits of bread first to soften it, then place it in their babies' mouths, but the bread was often black with mold. Still they chewed, still they hoped. In the camps, life hung by a thread. The Boer women, once proud farmers' wives, now huddled in tattered tents, their children's eyes hollow with hunger. They stirred thin gruel in dented tins, praying it would be enough to keep death at bay for one more day. The British Guards watched impassively. To them, this was war, a necessary evil to break the spirit of a stubborn people. To the women, it was a slow, grinding horror that ate away at their souls. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Disease came next. Typhoid, cholera, dysentery, names the women couldn't always pronounce, but knew too well. The symptoms were relentless. One child might vomit until his lips cracked. Another would lie motionless, eyes glassy, refusing food. Fevers came like waves. In some tents, all the children died within days. A mother would rise each dawn to find one more cold beside her. There was little medicine. 1 spoon of castor oil, a bit of quinine. Sometimes the nurses handed out powdered milk. But it was too little. It was always too little. The smell of sickness hung in the air like smoke, a mixture of rot, sweat, and waste. Even the wind smelled like sorrow. Women whispered prayers in Afrikaans, their voices hoarse from grief and thirst. They clung to their faith like a lifeline. Even as God seemed to turn his face away, sometimes they dug graves in the dark. When the wind was calm and the others were asleep, the ground was hard and the tools were few. Still, they dug. With hands, with spoons, with broken planks. They couldn't afford to wait for morning. In the heat of day, bodies spoiled quickly, and the children deserved better, even in death. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. There was no privacy in the camps, no place to weep without being seen, no place to bury your shame. Women shared tents with strangers. Sickness spread between baddies, sleeping too close, and still they tried to maintain dignity. Some would wrap a cloth around their heads each morning, combing their hair with fingers. They made dolls from rags, toys from string. They told Bible stories, sang lullabies, and taught their little ones to write names in the dust. Resistance here was not with guns, it was with dignity. It was refusing to break, even as everything else crumbled. The British Guards were often indifferent. Some were kind, most were not. Orders were followed. Food was weighed. Quotas met. Reports filed. To them, this was policy. To the women, it was purgatory. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. And yet, ... even here, there were moments of strange, flickering light. A nurse who whispered songs from home while dressing wounds. A soldier who smuggled in extra bread. A woman who shared her last biscuit with a child who wasn't hers. One woman wrote in a hidden diary, "I do not know if I will ever leave this place, but I will not let them take my soul. They can have my body, but not my spirit." Another painted tiny flowers on her tent wall with dye made from boiled roots, proof that even in horror, the human heart still seeks beauty, but mostly they endured quietly. Every morning they rose, they fetched water, they nursed the sick, they buried the dead, and then they did it again. Their hands grew calloused from labor, their eyes dim from tears. Yet still they persevered. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Toward the end of the war, conditions worsened. Winter brought frost and bitter winds. Children died in their sleep. Too weak to shiver, canvas offered no warmth. Blankets were thin. Even the sun felt cold. Some women began to whisper of escape, but there was nowhere to go. Outside the wire lay ash and ruin, burnt farms, dead cattle, empty homes. The camps were not just prisons. They were erasures, designed to starve the rebellion. Not just of bullets, but of memory, family, and lineage. It worked, but at what cost? In the years that followed, the survivors would speak of their time in hushed tones, of the taste of ashes on their tongues, of the smell of typhoid that never quite left their nostrils, of the weight of children they could not save. And to this day, ... The question echoed, not just what was done, but why. How could one people inflict such suffering on another? What darkness lurks in the human heart that allows for such cruelty? Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The legacy of the camps lingers still in South African soil, in the stories passed down through generations, in the scars that never fully healed. It is a reminder of the depths to which humanity can sink, and the heights of courage to which it can rise. For in those camps, amidst the sorrow and the pain, there was also strength. Women who refused to be broken, children who found laughter even in the darkest hours, a people who held on to their identity, their language, their faith. Even as the world around them crumbled, they emerged from the camps, changed, hardened, but not defeated. The Afrikaner spirit, forged in the crucible of suffering, would go on to shape a nation, for better and for worse. And so we remember, not to reopen old wounds, but to ensure that such horrors are never repeated, to honor those who endured, to learn from the past, so that we might build a better future. The fire has burned low now. The stars wheel overhead, and in the silence, we can almost hear the whispered prayers of those long ago women, their hopes, their fears, their indomitable will to survive. May we never forget. By now, the fences have become part of the horizon. Endless strands of barbed wire cutting across the veldt like scars. They buzzed faintly in the wind, whispering that this was no longer a land of freedom. This was a waiting room for grief. To a Boer woman in the camp, the wire meant many things. It meant she could not return to her farm, where the fields once whispered with wheat. It meant her husband, if he lived, could not find her. It meant her voice, her prayers, her weeping were caged. But worst of all, it meant her children could not run. Not into the wild, not into the wind, not even into dreams. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Each morning was the same roll call. Silence. A quick count. Then the scramble for water, for firewood, for food. There was a woman named Anna. She had once tended a thriving garden in Pretoria. Now she scavenged 4 scraps of cloth, trying to patch together warmth for her daughter. She remembered how her child used to laugh at butterflies. Now her eyes were dull like river stones. Now she huddled close, as if the world itself might shatter. The mothers became healers, storytellers, protectors, and mourners. When fever struck, they cooled brows with precious water. When hunger gnawed, they wove tales of feasts to come. And when hope flickered, they fanned it with whispered prayers in the dark. Some stopped praying altogether. It hurt too much. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. News trickled in like poison, and sometimes it didn't come at all. A rumor of victory, snuffed out by reality, a farm burned, a brother captured, a village erased from maps, its people scattered to the winds. Paper was scarce as rainfall. Some women etched memories into tin cups, others whispered stories to be passed down. A few kept small tokens hidden, a button, a lock of hair, a faded photograph, each a talisman against forgetting. They spoke of dysentery, of the biting cold, of the slow erosion of dignity. They spoke of children who grew old too quickly, their eyes holding wisdom no child should bear. They spoke of mothers who could no longer produce milk, and of nights when even the stars seemed to have abandoned them. The British officers called it strategic relocation. They said the families were being sheltered, but shelter here looked like a graveyard for the living. Over 26,000 women and children perished in those camps, a number that echoes through history. And yet, each one was a world entire. Each one was a dream, a laugh, a future that should have blossomed. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. As the conflict waned, there came a reckoning. Whispers became shout. The world learned of the suffering inflicted. Emily Hobaugh, an Englishwoman with a lion's heart, walked among the camps and bore witness to the unspeakable. She chronicled the despair, the haunting quiet of playgrounds without laughter. Her testimony shook nations. But for many, salvation arrived too late. Still, those who endured began the long walk home. 2 fields choked with weeds, 2 kraals without cattle, 2 lives that would never be the same. And yet, they persevered. Somehow, let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. One of the survivors, an old woman with eyes like embers, wrote this decades later. We were not soldiers, but we fought, not with guns, but with memory, not with hatred, but with hope. We fought to rebuild, to forgive, to speak the names of those who were silenced. Even now, you can walk those lands. The wire has rusted away. The grass grows tall and sweet, but beneath your feet, the earth still holds its secrets. And when the wind blows just so, you might catch the faintest echo of a lullaby, sung to a child whose story is etched in the very stones. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The camps cast long shadows across South African history. For the Boers, the Dutch-descended farmers who had called this land home for generations, it was a wound that would not easily heal. Families torn apart, a way of life disrupted, trust shattered like the mirrors in abandoned farmhouses. Yet from this crucible of suffering, something unexpected emerged. A fierce determination, a will to not just survive, but to thrive. Women who had once been content to tend hearth and home now stood as pillars of their communities. They rebuilt, they remembered, they taught their children not just of loss, but of resilience. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The story of the camps became woven into the fabric of Afrikaner identity, not as a call for vengeance, but as a reminder of the strength that lies within. In the years that followed, monuments were built, not grand statues of generals, but simple stones etched with names, each one a testament to a life that mattered. And in quiet corners of the veldt, you might still find old women who remember, their hands, once soft, now calloused by years of labor, their eyes holding stories that books can never fully capture. They speak of the wire, but also of the friendships forged in darkness, of small kindnesses that bloomed like flowers in cracked earth. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The legacy of the camps is complex. It shaped a nation's psyche, influenced politics, and left scars that would take generations to fade. But it also birthed a fierce pride, a knowledge that even in the darkest times, the human spirit can endure, can even find moments of beauty. Today, South Africa grapples with its many histories. The story of the Boer women in the camps is but one thread in a tapestry woven from triumph and tragedy alike. Yet it remains a powerful reminder of the cost of conflict, of the strength of mothers, of the enduring power of hope. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. As night falls over the veldt, the crickets begin their song, the same song they've sung for countless generations. And if you listen closely, you might hear something more. The whisper of voices long gone. Carried on the wind, they tell of wire and ashgate, but also of love that outlasted war, of faith that survived the unthinkable, of a people who refused to be forgotten. This is their story. This is our story. A tale of endurance, written in the very soil of South Africa. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. In the golden dusk of the African veldt, where the wind whispers through thorn trees and the red soil keeps old secrets, there once stood a man who belonged to two worlds and was beloved by neither. His name ... was Louis Botha. To some, he was a hero. To others, a traitor. But to history, he is a question that still lingers in the dust. Let us begin, not with the end, but with the boy. Louis was born in 1862 in the Free State. A child of the land, his bare feet knew the sting of dry grass. His eyes memorized the paths of stars long before they ever read maps. He grew up among ox wagons, rifle drills, prayer circles, and ghost stories. A quiet boy, with a stillness that would one day command armies. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. As the years unfolded like sun-bleached parchment, Louis learned more than just survival. He listened to elders who spoke of blood and soil, to mothers who had lost sons, to cattlemen whispering prophecies around embers, to Zulu herders, Sesotho traders, and dusty missionaries who passed through the wild frontier towns. When the Second Anglo-Boer War erupted in 1899, Louis Botha was not the most powerful man in the Republic, but he was calm, he was clever, and most of all he was kind. His soldiers followed him, not out of fear, but out of fierce, bone-deep trust. He rode without rank markers. He shared meals from the same tin bowls as his men, and when they bled he carried them himself. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. But war is not impressed by kindness, and the British Empire was vast. As British troops marched across the land, burning homesteads, salting fields, herding women into barbed wire, Penn's Louis Botha faced choices no man should bear. He could continue the fight, watching more farms crumble and more children die in the camps. Or ... he could lay down arms signed to peace. But what does peace look like when the price is silence? When the enemy offers mercy with one hand and empire with the other? The Treaty of Vereeniging came in 1902. Louis Botha signed it, and with that single pen stroke, he condemned himself in the eyes of many of his own people. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. They said he gave in, that he sold the blood of Boer boys for comfort and British coin. But those who truly saw him knew the cost. His letters from that time are full of weariness. He writes of sleepless nights, of haunted faces in camps, of dreams interrupted by coughing children and burning farms. He did not sell out. He broke quietly, gracefully, so that others would not have to. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. And so, the warrior became a politician. From 1910, he was no longer General Boer but Prime Minister of the new Union of South Africa. He spoke Queen's English. He shook British hands. He smiled in courtrooms and wore tailored coats. But his heart remained buried somewhere in the veldt, beneath the ashes of war. Still, he tried to unite a broken land. He tried to balance the fury of Afrikaner nationalists with the demands of empire. He tried and often failed to speak for the black Africans whose voices the empire refused to hear. And in that trying ... he suffered. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. By the time the First World War rolled across the globe, Louis Botha was older, heavier, his once sharp eyes clouded with sorrow. And yet, when Britain called, he answered. He led South African troops into German-held Southwest Africa, fighting not for liberty, not for honor, but for balance. He believed that to survive, South Africa had to play the game of empires, but every move cost him. His health declined, his people's rage deepened, and his soul grew thin like the dust on his old battlefield boots. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. He died in 1919, just after the end of the Great War, not from bullets, but from a slow, quiet grief that had festered inside him for years. When his coffin was lowered into the ground, some wept, some cheered, and most just stayed silent. Because Louis Botha was never a man of easy answers. He was the man who ended the Boer War but could never end the war inside himself. He stood between fire and mercy, between two languages, between two flags, between the land he loved and the empire that swallowed it. Let us pause here one last time. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. In the annals of history, Louis Botha's name echoes with a bittersweet resonance. A man caught in the crossfire of empires, his story is one of impossible choices and heavy burdens. The veldt remembers him not as a conqueror or a saint, but as a son of the soil who dared to dream of peace in a time of war. His legacy is etched in the very fabric of South Africa, a complex tapestry of courage, compromise, and compassion. As the embers of our campfire fade, we are left to ponder the weight of leadership, the cost of unity, and the enduring power of a gentle heart in a harsh world. Louis Botha's journey reminds us that history is not black and white, but a canvas painted in shades of grey where heroes and villains blur, and where true greatness often lies in the quiet moments of sacrifice. The wind still whispers his name across the grasslands, carrying with it the echoes of a nation's birth pangs and the soft lament of a leader who gave everything, even his own legacy, for the hope of a united future. As dawn breaks over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, we rise from our night of storytelling. The tale of Louis Botha lingers in our minds, a poignant reminder that the path of reconciliation is often lonely, misunderstood, and fraught with personal cost. Yet it is a path that must be walked, for in its winding course lie the seeds of healing, of understanding, and of a shared tomorrow. And so, as we gather our belongings and prepare to return to our own time and place, we carry with us the lessons of Louis Botha, man who dared to stand in the gap, who chose the difficult road of compromise over the easier path of continued conflict. His story challenges us to look beyond simple narratives of good and evil, to recognize the humanity in those we call enemies, and to find the courage to build bridges, even when it means facing the scorn of those we love. As we depart, the veldt seems to whisper one last time, reminding us that true heroism often lies not in grand gestures or battlefield glory, but in the quiet, thankless work of peacemaking, in the willingness to bear the weight of difficult decisions, so that others might know a lighter burden. And perhaps, in some small way, by remembering Louis Boterby, grappling with the complexities of his choices and the depth of his sacrifice, we honor not just the man, but the enduring hope for a world where understanding triumphs over division, where compassion outweighs vengeance, and where the wounds of the past can finally begin to heal. The story of Louis Botha is not just a tale of yesteryear, but a mirror held up to our own time, challenging us to consider what sacrifices we might make, what bridges we might build, in the name of a more united and compassionate world. As the last stars fade from the lightning sky, we carry this story with us, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there are those who dare to dream of dawn. The Union Building stood tall that day, but something deeper loomed behind them. A nation's heart, split and aching, beat beneath the stone facade. The air hung heavy with unspoken words, with dreams deferred, with wounds still raw, for Louis Botha was more than a man. He was a mirror, reflecting back the hopes and fears of a land not yet whole. The Afrikaners came, many out of duty. Some wore black armbands, others wore khaki. There were farmers with mud still on their boots, their calloused hands clasped in silent prayer. There were former commandos whose legs had been broken in war, who leaned on crutches carved from the very veldt that had seen their blood spilled. But there were also British officers in pressed uniforms, with polished shoes that had never touched veldt dust. Their backs were straight, their faces impassive, as though trying to hold back the tide of history with sheer will. And in between, the ordinary soul schoolboys with newspaper caps pulled low over curious eyes, maids in borrowed shawls that couldn't quite hide their trembling hands, a Zulu railway worker leaning on his spade, his gaze fixed on a horizon only he could see, all of them drawn by something harder to name, a need to witness, to understand, to forgive. The crowd swelled and shifted, a living thing breathing with the pulse of a nation in flux. Here, a group of Boer women, their faces etched with lines of grief, whispering prayers in the tongue of their ancestors. There, a cluster of English merchants, their ledgers forgotten for a day as they stood in uneasy silence. And everywhere, the watchful eyes of those whose voices had been silenced for too long. The farm laborers, the house servants, the men who had dug the gold that built this city but would never call it home, all of them drawn to this moment, this impossible funeral where the threads of a fractured land might, for a breath, be woven together. The coffin was carried on a wagon jazz like those that had once crossed the Karoo. There were no gold horses, no military parade. Just 6 solemn pallbearers in dusty coats, their faces set with the gravity of men who knew the weight of what they carried. It was a simple thing, that wooden box, unadorned, save for a spray of Proteaster, flower of the veldt, stubborn and beautiful. Like the man it held, perhaps, like the country he had tried to shape, the silence was immense. You could hear the creak of wagon wheels, a sound that echoed across decades, across battlefields long grown over with grass. The soft sob of an old woman whose son never came home from Spion Kop, her grief as fresh as the day the telegram arrived. The scrape of boots on stone, a reminder of marshes, both triumphant and desperate, the shifting of sky, as though even the heavens paused to bear witness, and when the hymn beganiet was not in English. It was in Afrikaans, the language of the lager, the language of loss. They sang Stem van Suid-Afrika with trembling voices, because even those who hated Botha knew he had carried something heavy, so they would not have to. The words rose and fell, a lament for what was and what might have been. O God, our Father, we lift our hearts to Thee. Voices cracked on the high notes, thick with emotion. British soldiers stood stiffly, their lips pressed tight. but their eyes, if you looked closely, held a glimmer of something like respect. For in that moment, as the song swelled, it was impossible not to feel the weight of history, the cost of war, the price of peace. After the hymn, there was no thunderous applause, only the quiet folding of handkerchiefs, the slow turning of backs, and the whisper of grass, as though the land itself sighed, knowing that this day marked not an end, but a beginning. He was buried at Heroes' Acre, next to men who had died both for and against him. A strange fraternity of memory, a graveyard where enemies now shared the same sun, the same soil, the same uneasy peace. Louis Botha's grave was marked with a plain stone. No towering statue, no imperial lion, just a name, a date, and an ache that stretched across generations. As the last of the mourners drifted away, the sun began to set. Long shadows stretched across the veldt, painting the world in shades of gold and blood, a fitting palette for a land still struggling to define itself. In the gathering twilight, a small group lingered. An old Boer farmer, his face weathered as the Drockens, a young British clerk, his collar wilting in the heat, a Zulu woman, her eyes bright with unshed tears. They stood in silence. These unlikely companions. What words could bridge the chasms between them? What gesture could heal wounds so deep? And yet they stood together, if not united, present, if not reconciled. Perhaps that's the only monument Louis Botha ever wanted. Not the granite, not the books, not the speeches, but the quiet knowledge that, for a moment in time, he held a bleeding nation in his arms and tried to keep it from tearing apart. As night fell, the stars emerged. The same stars that had guided Voortrekkers across vast plains, the same stars that had shone on Zulu kingdoms and British outposts, the same stars that now watched over a country still searching for its soul. They say the dead do not speak, but if you listen closely, as the wind drifts over Pretoria's hills, as the aloe flowers sway in winter, you might hear something like a sigh, not of peace, but of patience. Louis Botha still waits for the country to finish what he never could, to heal the rifts that run deeper than politics, to forge a nation from the fragments of empire and tribe. It is a long wait, a generations-long wait. But perhaps, on nights like this, when the veldt is quiet and the memories of old battles fade, you can almost believe it's possible that someday the children of Boer and Britain and Bantu will stand together under these stars and see not division but possibility. Until then, the grave stands silent, a reminder of what was lost, what was gained, and what remains to be done. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars, listening for the whisper of a future yet to be written. There are words that do not survive the battlefield, not because they are destroyed, but because they are too soft for history books, too private for statues, too tender for a country still learning how to grieve. Louis Botha, the general, has been studied. Louis Botha, the Prime Minister, has been debated. But Louis Botha, the man with a pen, is almost forgotten. Except for the letters, dozens of them, scattered in archives, buried beneath government dispatches and diplomatic cables, some never sent, some never answered, some never meant for any eyes but one. And yet they are here, whispers from a man who carried 1,000 burdens and had no room to set them down. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The first letters are from the war years, written to his wife, Annie. My dearest, they often begin, and what follows is rarely strategy or complaint. It is weather, it is dreams, it is the color of the morning sky over the hills near In one, he writes, I saw a kudu today, grazing peacefully in the veldt. It made me think of you. waiting in that house without my footsteps, even in the midst of command. He was thinking of stillness, of silence, of her, of a place where he was not a general, but a man with rough hands and tired feet, longing for warm bread and quiet love. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Then come the darker letters, the ones without dates, the ones with ink smeared by tears or dust. He writes of commandos buried under acacia trees, of burghers who die whispering their wives' names, of his own guilt. I sent them there, Annie. I told them to go, and I am praised for it. What kind of God allows this? These are not political letters. They are confessions, written not to a wife, but to the vast African sky, and sometimes to no one. One letter has no name, no greeting, only a single sentence. We are all broken, and the veldt will not let us mend. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. But there are other letters too, written to friends who had become enemies. Two fellow Boers who accused him of betrayal. One such letter begins, "If I am a traitor, then I am one for reconciliation, not for gold." He speaks of the long years after the war, when the Mausers were silent but the wounds were louder, when he sat in rooms filled with English voices, pretending not to flinch, when he smiled through meetings that felt like funerals, when he said yes, so that others would not have to die for saying no. In another letter, unsigned, he says, "I have never slept through the night. Not since the winter of 1902. These are the letters that were never published, never quoted, never embroidered onto lager banners. They are too raw, too slow, too human." Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The final letters are almost dreams. One is addressed to his youngest son. In it, he tells him, "When you grow up, they will speak my name in many tones. Some will bless me, others will curse me. But none of them will know how warm your small hand felt in mine as we walked among the proteas after the rain." Here, the great general disappears. There is no war, no speech, no command. Just a father, just a man, just a fleeting memory of peace. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. And so we come to the end of the letters. Some were burned, some buried, some placed in kists and forgotten, but those that remain tell us not of a perfect man, but of a complicated one. A man who wore a uniform, but dreamed of freedom. A man who brokered peace, but never found it for himself. A man who held his country so tightly, he forgot to hold his own soul. Louis Botha did not die on a battlefield. He died in office, in a chair, in silence. But perhaps his truest voice still lies on those pages, creased, stained, and barely breathing, waiting for a gentler world to finally read them. Let's pause here and listen to the wind. It still carries the hush of his handwriting. In the quiet of the night, we can almost hear the scratching of his pen, the soft rustle of paper, the weight of words unsaid. These letters, hidden for so long, speak of a man caught between worlds, a Boer general who became the first Prime Minister of the Union of South Africa, a warrior who yearned for peace. They tell of nights spent under canvas, the smell of gunpowder mingling with the scent of the veldt, of dawn patrols and dusk negotiations, of a man who carried the hopes and fears of a nation in his saddlebag. But more than that, they speak of the cost of leadership, the toll it takes on a soul. In one letter, dated just after the end of the Second Boer War, he writes, "I dream of Colenso, of Spyankop. I see the faces of the young men I sent to die. They do not accuse, they simply watch. And I cannot look away. These are not the words of a textbook hero. They are the confessions of a man grappling with the weight of his decisions. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. There are letters that speak of hope, too, of a vision for a united South Africa, where Boer and Britain might find common ground. He writes to a former enemy, now a cautious ally. We have bled the same soil, now we must water it together, or watch it turn to dust. But even in these moments of optimism, there is an undercurrent of doubt, a fear that the wounds of war run too deep, that reconciliation might be a dream beyond reach. In a letter to his brother, he confides, "I fear we are building on quicksand, that the foundation of this new nation is not strong enough to bear the weight of our history." These are the thoughts that never made it into speeches, the doubts that were masked by the stern face of statesmanship. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. As the years pass, the letters change. The handwriting grows more labored, the tone more weary. He writes of the strain of office, of the constant balancing act between the demands of the British Empire and the aspirations of his own people. To an old comrade, he admits, "I sometimes wonder if it would have been better to have died on the veldt, with a rifle in my hands and the taste of freedom on my lips." But even in these moments of despair, there is a stubborn resilience, a determination to see his vision through no matter the personal cost. In one of his final letters, written just months before his death, he tells his wife, "I am tired, my love, so very tired. But I cannot rest until I know that our children will inherit a land of peace, not of ashes." Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. These letters, forgotten for so long, paint a portrait of a man far more complex than the bronze statues and history books suggest. They show us Louis Botha, the dreamer, the doubter, the devoted husband and father. They reveal the human heart beating beneath the general's uniform and the politician's suit. In their pages, we find not just the story of one man, but the story of a nation in its painful birth. The story of a people trying to forge unity from the ashes of conflict. And perhaps, in these fragile sheets of paper, in these words written by lamplight and candlelight, we might find something of ourselves. For who among us has not felt the weight of responsibility? Who has not questioned the path they've chosen? Who has not longed for a moment of peace in a world of turmoil? Let's pause here and listen to the wind. It still carries the hush of his handwriting. And in that hush, if we listen closely, we might hear the echoes of our own unspoken words, our own unwritten letters. For, in the end, Louis Botha's story is not just a tale of generals and prime ministers. It is a human story, a story of love and loss, of duty and doubt, of a man trying to build a future while haunted by the past. And as we fold these letters, as we place them back in their dusty archives, we are left with a question. What letters will we leave behind? What words will whisper our truths long after we are gone? The fire dies down. The stars wheel overhead, and in the silence of the African night, the ghosts of history continue their endless conversation. The land was scarred, deep, unforgiving. No one could have imagined the cost of what lay beneath, until the blood began to flow. A trickle at first, then a torrent that stained the earth. And suddenly, the ground was no longer just soil. It was a battlefield. This was Kimberley. After it became Kimberley, no longer just grazing plains, but a place where dreams and nightmares collided, where fortunes were made and lives were broken. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The compounds stood like fortresses, Walls of corrugated iron and barbed wire. Inside, men from every corner of southern Africa. Zulu, Xhosa, Sotho, Tswana, all drawn by the promise of diamonds, all trapped in a system that saw them as little more than tools. At night, the compounds echoed with songs, laments for home, prayers for survival, dreams of freedom. But when dawn broke, it was back to the pit, back to the darkness, back to the dust that choked lungs and dimmed eyes. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The big hole yawned wider with each passing day, a mouth in the earth, hungry for more. More diamonds, more labor, more lives. And at the edge of the pit stood the white men, overseers with whips and ledgers, counting stones, counting profits, never counting the cost in human suffering. Rhodes' shadow loomed large over it all. His vision of empire carved into the very rock, but empires are built on bones, and Kimberley's foundations ran deep with sorrow. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. In the shafts, men worked by candlelight, sweat-slicked bodies pressed against stone. Every swing of the pickaxe a gamble. Would it reveal a fortune, or bring the tunnel crashing down? Some found diamonds, most found only dust. And for those who dared to pocket a stone, the punishment was swift and brutal. Strip searches, beatings, imprisonment. The company's wealth was guarded more fiercely than the lives of those who unearthed it. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Above ground, a town grew, streets lined with grand houses and gleaming shops, but it was a town divided. White faces in the cafes and theaters, black bodies in the shadows, permitted only to serve. The wealth flowed one way, up from the earth, into white hands, across oceans, to distant banks and royal coffers, and all the while the miners' families waited, in villages far from Kimberley, wondering if their men would return, if the diamonds would bring prosperity or only pain. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Disease spread through the compounds like wildfire. Tuberculosis, pneumonia, silic. The company doctors treated symptoms, never the cause. For to truly heal would mean to stop the digging, and the digging could not stop. Men coughed blood into hid their weakness from the overseers. For to show fatigue was to risk being sent away, and to be sent away was to lose the only income their families had. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Resistance brewed in whispers, in secret meetings under cover of night, men from different tribes finding common cause. Unity forged in shared oppression, but the company had eyes everywhere. Informants, spies, any hint of organized dissent was crushed. Leaders disappeared. Families threatened. The message was clear, that diamonds would flow, no matter the human cost. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Years passed, decades. The big hole grew deeper, the fortunes grew larger, and the graves multiplied. Nameless men buried in unmarked plots, their stories lost to time, their sacrifices forgotten by a world dazzled by diamond light. But in the compounds, memories lived on, passed from father to son, mother to daughter. The true history of Kimberley, written not in books, but in scars and calluses. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. And what of the diamonds themselves? Those cold, hard stones, symbols of love and luxury. Each one carried a hidden weight. The weight of broken but shattered dreams, lives cut short in dark tunnels far below the earth. They adorned the necks of the wealthy, sparkled on the fingers of brides. But if you looked closely, really closely, you might see the faintest tinge of red, the blood of Kimberley, never truly washed away. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The legacy of the diamond fields stretched far beyond Kimberley. It shaped a nation, deepened divides, set patterns of exploitation that would echo for generations. The wealth extracted from the earth became the foundation of apartheid, a system as unyielding as the diamonds themselves. And yet, even in the darkest shafts, in the most oppressive compounds, hope refused to die. Men dreamed of a different future. Women kept families together against impossible odds. Children learned to read by candlelight, preparing for a day when the mines would no longer define their destiny. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Today, the big hole stands silent, a monument to greed, a reminder of suffering, but also a testament to human resilience. For the story of Kimberley is not just one of exploitation, it is a story of survival, of cultures meeting and mingling in the crucible of the compounds, of languages shared and new identities forged. From the pain of the diamond fields emerged a people, stronger, more unified, ready to fight for a future where the earth's riches would belong to all. Let's pause here and breathe in the stillness of the night. The stars above Kimberley still shine, as they did when the first diamond was pulled from the soil. They have witnessed it all, the triumph and the tragedy, the brutality and the beauty, and perhaps, in their ancient light, we can find a glimmer of wisdom, a reminder that true wealth lies not in glittering stones, but in the bonds between people, in the strength of communities, in the unbreakable spirit of those who dare to dream of justice. The story of Kimberley is not over. It lives on in the DNA of a nation. A complex legacy, a wound still healing, and a challenge to build a future worthy of those who paid the ultimate price in the quest for diamonds. Let's pause here and honor the memory of the nameless thousands, their toil, their tears, their unsung heroism. For in the end, it is not the diamonds that are Kimberley's greatest treasure. It is the indomitable human spirit that survived the mines and emerged against all odds, still shining. In the mining compounds of Kimberley, life was not simply harsh. It was orchestrated, timetables, inspections, blowing whistles that signaled the start of shifts, as if the miners were not men, but cogs in a colonial machine. Each man had a tag, a number, a bunk, a rule book etched not in ink, but in consequences. The rules were enforced by overseers, often fellow Africans, chosen for their loyalty to the mine bosses. They were given batons, and sometimes the power went to their heads. Divide and rule, the oldest trick in the colonial handbook. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. In the evenings, after the sweat and dust of the mines had crusted into the skin, the men would gather, not in protest, at least not aloud, but in whispers, in songs that hinted at something more. Songs of land taken, of homes left behind, of brothers lost in shaft, collapses, of diamonds that shimmered, but only for others. One such song, passed down in fragments, said, "They promised gold, but gave us stone. They took our strength, and left us bone." Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. By the late 1890s, tensions were rising. The compound walls were not just physical, they were psychological. Miners worked 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. Rations were reduced, punishments increased, and beneath the red dust, something began to simmer. It wasn't just about wages. It was about dignity. A stolen kind of dignity reduced to numbers, muzzled in compounds, searched like thieves. A quiet decision began to form among the miners. They would walk out, not with fire or guns, but with silence. A collective refusal, a protest of stillness. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. But it never came. Before the strike could materialize, the mine's intelligence network got wind of it. Spies, informants, a letter in a whisper overheard by the wrong ears. Overnight, ringleaders were rounded up, flogged publicly. Others were vanished, sent to remote prisons, or worse, never seen again. The silence remained, but not the rebellion. It had been strangled before it could speak. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Yet something did survive. The memory, whispers passed down to sons and nephews. Etchings on wooden bunk posts, a rhythm in protest, songs decades later. When the miners in the 1920s and 1930s began to strike for better conditions, they sang the old Kimberley verses. They remembered the men who had tried and failed before them. Resistance is not always about winning. Sometimes it is about refusing to forget. Let's pause here and breathe gently. Beneath the stillness, the earth remembers. In the depths of the mines, where darkness reigned and hope seemed a distant light, the workers carried more than just picks and shovels. They carried dreams of freedom, of dignity, of a future where their children wouldn't be bound by the same chains. The compounds became crucibles, not just of diamonds, but of a simmering discontent that would shape South Africa's future. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The failed rebellion of Kimberley was not an isolated incident. It was a spark in a long chain of resistance. From the mines of the Witwatersrand to the docks of Cape Town, workers began to organize, to whisper, to dream of a different South Africa. The songs of Kimberley echoed in union meetings, in secret gatherings, in the hearts of those who dared to imagine a world beyond the compound walls. One such song, its origins lost to time, spoke of a day when the earth will shake, the chains will break, and we'll stand tall, no more to fall. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The legacy of Kimberley's silent rebellion lived on in the 1946 African mine workers' strike, in the defiance campaigns of the 1950s, in the uprisings that would eventually bring down the apartheid regime. The miners of Kimberley may have been silenced, but their spirit spoke through generations. It whispered in the ears of young activists. It thundered in the speeches of liberation leaders. It pulsed in the veins of every South African who yearned for freedom. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Today, the mines of Kimberley stand as a testament, not just to the wealth extracted from the earth, but to the resilience of the human spirit. The compound walls have crumbled. The whistles no longer blow, but the memories remain. In museums, in oral histories, in the very fabric of a nation still grappling with its past, the failed rebellion of Kimberley reminds us that resistance takes many forms, that silence can be as powerful as shouts, that even in defeat, seeds of change are sown. Let's pause here and breathe gently. Beneath the stillness, the earth remembers. As we stand on the red soil of Kimberley, we feel the weight of history beneath our feet. The diamonds may have been mined out, but the stories, the struggles, the dreams, they remain buried. Not in the earth, but in the hearts of those who came after. The rebellion that never was became the rebellion that always is. A constant reminder that the fight for dignity for justice, for humanity, is never truly lost. It lives on in whisper, in songs, in the quiet determination of those who refuse to be silenced. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. As we end this chapter of our journey through South Africa's past, we carry with us the echoes of Kimberley, the clang of pickaxes, the hum of protest songs, the silence of a rebellion strang-lad in its cradle, but also the hope, the resilience, the unbreakable spirit of a people who, even in the darkest minds, never lost sight of the light. Let's pause here and breathe gently. Beneath the stillness, the earth remembers. And as we move forward, we carry with us the lessons of Kimberley. That change may be slow, but it is inevitable. That even the smallest act of resistance can ripple through history. That the story of South Africa, like the story of humanity, is one of constant struggle, of setbacks and triumphs, of darkness and light, but always, always moving forward. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. As we leave Kimberley behind, we carry its spirit with us, into the future, into hope, into the continuing struggle for a just, unequal South Africa. The rebellion that never was becomes the rebellion that always will be. In our hearts, in our actions, in our unwavering belief in the dignity of every human being. Let's pause here and breathe gently. Beneath the stillness, the earth remembers, and so do we. In the heart of Kimberley stood a small stone chapel, modest, weathered, but strong like the people who worshipped inside it. The British had allowed its construction, thinking it a harmless spiritual distraction, a place to keep the natives occupied with psalms and prayers. Not politics, but beneath that cross-shaped roof, another story stirred. A chief, a congregation, and a secret. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The chief's name was Tau Molf, a tall, slow-spoken elder from the Swana lands, who had come to Kimberley not to mine, but to watch. They thought he was just another convert, another tired old man in a wool blanket, another pair of calloused feet to fill a pew. But Tau was not tired, he was observing, and he had heard something, a rumor, that during the early days of the rush, before the British seized control, a local shepherd had discovered a strange, bluish stone just outside the compound fence. He had shown it to a missionary, who pocketed it and vanished the next day, but not before whispering something to a young altar boy. That altar boy was now grown, and Tau had finally found him. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The man's name was Malefi. He worked as a cleaner in the British officers' mess. Quiet, polite, invisible. But when Tau sat beside him after service one Sunday, he did not speak of salvation. He asked about the diamond. At first, Malefi denied everything, but Tau simply waited. Each week, they sat, sang hymns, spoke of crops, and then, one day, Malefi wept. "It's still there," he whispered, "beneath the chapel, buried where the bell ropes hang." Tau said nothing. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The diamond wasn't just a stone. It was proof that wealth had passed through black hands and was hidden, hoarded, dismissed. Tau didn't want to sell it. He wanted to protect it, to ensure the story would not be forgotten. One night, he returned. The chapel was empty. By lamplight, he crept through the rear door, found the spot, dug softly, carefully, and there it was. no larger than a hen's egg, but it shimmered like moonlight on water. Tao held it for only a moment, then reburred it deeper, wrapped in cloth, surrounded by salt, and carved a tiny mark in the floorboard above. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. He never told another soul, but when he died, they found a page tucked into his Bible. No name, no location, just one line, written in trembling handwriting. Some wealth is too holy to be owned. And so the story ends. A diamond still buried beneath Kimberley. Not in the mine, but in the heart of a chapel, guarded not by walls, but by memory. Let's sit in silence for a moment. For some treasures are not meant to shine, only to remind. The tale of Tao and the hidden diamond echoes through the years, a whisper of resistance in a land where so much was taken. In Kimberley's dusty street, where fortunes were made and lost, where empires clashed and cultures collided, this secret lay buried, a testament to those who refused to be defined by the greed of others. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The chapel still stands, its weathered stones, a silent witness to countless prayers and hidden hopes. Sunday after Sunday, hymns rise to the rafters, while beneath the floorboards, a different kind of faith endures, not in riches or in empires, but in the quiet strength of those who keep their own counsel. The British never knew, the mine owners never suspected, that right under their noses a treasure lay unclaimed, not because it couldn't be found, but because it was protected by something stronger than greed, the will of a people. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. In the years that followed, Kimberley changed. The mines grew deeper. The city sprawled wider, but the chapel remained, a constant in a sea of change. And with each passing generation, whispers of the hidden diamond grew fainter, until they were little more than legend. Yet sometimes, on quiet nights, when the moon is full and the wind whispers through the acacia trees, they say you can see an old man standing outside the chapel, leaning on his cane, his eyes fixed on some distant point, a guardian keeping watch over a secret that was never his to reveal. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. What became of Maleficent, the altar boy turned cleaner? Some say he left Kimberley, carrying the weight of his secret to distant shores. Others insist he stayed, living out his days in the shadow of the chapel, a quiet protector of its hidden treasure. The truth, like the diamond itself, remains buried, but perhaps that's as it should be. For in a land where so much was taken, where identities were erased, and histories rewritten, this one small act of defiance stands as a beacon, a reminder that not all wealth can be measured in carats or pounds, that some riches lie in the stories we choose to tell and the secrets we choose to keep. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. And what of the missionary who first pocketed the stone? History has forgotten his name, his face lost to time, but his actions set in motion a chain of events that would outlive him, outlast empires, and speak to generations yet unborn. Did he know, as he fled Kimberley, the true value of what he'd found? Not the diamond's worth in coin, but its power as a symbol? We'll never know. But in his greed, he planted a seed of resistance, a tiny spark that would beneath the surface of history. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Today, Kimberley is a different place. The great hole gapes wide, a monument to human ambition and the earth's hidden treasures. Tourists come to gaze into its depths, to marvel at the diamonds that made this city, but few know the story of the stone that was never claimed, the wealth that was never spent. It lies there still, beneath weathered floorboards, wrapped in cloth and surrounded by salt, a secret heart, beaten in time with the prayers that still echo through the chapel. And perhaps, in its own way, it has become something more than a mere gem. A symbol of resilience, of quiet dignity, of a people who refuse to be defined by the wealth beneath their feet. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. So when you walk the streets of Kimberley, when you pass that small stone chapel, remember this tale. Remember Tao, the chief who came to watch. Remember Malif, the boy who kept a secret. And remember that sometimes the greatest treasures are those that remain hidden, guarded not by locks and keys, but by the strength of a people's memory. For in the end, it is not the diamond that matters, but the story it tells, a story of courage, of wisdom, of a wealth too holy to be owned. And as the fire dies down and the stars wheel overhead, we are left with this truth, that some lights shine brightest when they remain unseen, illuminating not the world around us, but the depths within our hearts. Let's sit in silence for a moment, for some treasures are not meant to shine, only to remind the British Empire had no shortage of grand halls, marble domes in India, Parliament in London, but here, in the South African veldt, command was issued not from palaces, but from tents. Canvas stretched over wooden poles, cots creaking under stiff backs, and the ever-present smell of pipe smoke, gun oil, and boiled beef. This was the realm of the British officer during the Anglo-Boer War. Not quite at war, but never quite at peace, surrounded by maps and silence. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Each morning began with ritual. Not prayer, but tea. The officer would rise just before sunrise, shirt still creased from yesterday's sweat. A local boy, often a grown African man, would bring in the tin kettle, steam rising through the cold. 2 lumps of sugar, no milk in camp. Then came the boots, blackened by someone else. The uniform, brushed and laid out. By the time the sun tipped above the ridgeline, the officer was seated at a folding desk, pretending to read reports while waiting for something to happen. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The boredom was unbearable. For all the Empire's might, there were no great battles every day. Just dust, delays, and disease. Officers wrote long, pompous letters home, describing brave acts that never happened. They measured their importance by the size of their mess tent, the shine of their boots, or the accent of their valet, and through it all, they remained mostly ignorant of the war's deeper wounds. They laughed about Boer women's fussiness, mocked African customs, and sketched the local people in their journals as curiosities never humans. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Outside the tent, things were different. African porters hauled ammunition carts. Black scouts risked their lives on the front lines. Children fetched water in heat that cracked their heels. But inside the tent, there was talk of cricket, of Cambridge, of promotions. There was gin, if the shipment arrived, and sardines in tins, eaten on stale bread while overlooking starving locals. Some officers kept journals. One wrote, rather proudly, "The Kaffir boys are remarkably obedient. One grows used to their silence. Like shadows they move when commanded." Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. But not all officers were cruel. Some were just confused. Raised in stiff English homes, sent to fight in a land they didn't understand, taught that blackness was a lesser state. They didn't know how to speak to the African soldiers who saved their lives. They didn't know how to mourn the children dying in camps nearby. So they kept to their tea, their chess games, their sermons on Sunday morning, and every night they zipped their tents closed, listened to the jackals howl, and wondered, what victory really looked like in a place so vast, so dry, and so haunted. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The South African landscape stretched endlessly before them, a stark contrast to the manicured lawns of their homeland. Here, the earth was red and unforgiving, the air thick with dust and the weight of unspoken histories. In the quiet moments, when the camp settled into an uneasy slumber, some officers found themselves questioning the very purpose of their presence. They'd come to subdue a people, to claim a land, but the vastness of Africa seemed to mock their ambitions. The local Africans, whom they dismissively called natives, moved through the camp like ghosts, their dark skin glistening with sweat as they performed tasks deemed too menial for British hands. Yet it was these same hands that kept the officers alive, that knew the secrets of survival in this harsh terrain. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Morning brought a flurry of activity. The clinking of mess tins, the barked orders of sergeants, the distant rumble of supply wagons. But for the officers, it was a time of quiet contemplation. They sipped their tea, savoring the taste of home in this alien land. Some read letters from sweethearts back in England, their minds drifting to cool green meadows and the gentle chime of church bells. Others pored over maps, tracing lines across territories they'd never seen, planning campaigns against an enemy that seemed to melt into the landscape. And always, there was the heat. It pressed down upon them like a physical weight, seeping into their bones, clouding their thoughts. Even in the relative comfort of their tents, sweat beaded on their brows and stained their crisp uniforms. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. As the sun climbed higher, the camp stirred to life. African laborers moved silently about their tasks, invisible to the officers, except when needed. The smell of cooking fires mingled with the acrid scent of gunpowder and unwashed bodies. In the distance, columns of dust rose from the veldt, signaling the movement of troops or supply convoys. The officers watched with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Each cloud could bring news of victory, or the grim tidings of another skirmish lost. Some found solace in writing diaries filled with flowery prose, describing heroic deeds and noble sacrifices. Reality, with its mud and blood and terror, was carefully edited out. These pages would one day be read in drawing rooms back home, and no one wanted to tarnish the glorious myth of empire. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. As evening approached, the tension in the camp grew. The Boers were known for their night raids. Swift and deadly, officers gathered in small groups, voices low, eyes scanning the darkening horizon. Inside their tents, they clung to the rituals of home, polishing boots until they gleamed, arranging their few possessions with military precision. Some read from well-worn Bibles, seeking comfort in familiar verses, but the night brought its own sounds. The eerie cries of unfamiliar birds, the rustling of animals in the underbrush, and sometimes, carried on the wind, the faint strains of Boer voices singing hymns around distant campfires. In these moments, The vastness of Africa seemed to press in upon them. The stars overhead were not the stars of England. The earth beneath their feet was not the soil of home. They were strangers here, unwelcome and out of place. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. As sleep finally claimed them, dreams were filled with images of home, of green fields and gentle rain, of mothers and sweethearts left behind. But always, the dreams would fade, replaced by the harsh reality of the African dawn. And so another day would begin. Tea would be poured, reports would be read, and the great machine of empire would grind on, oblivious to the cost in lives and souls. For in the end, that was the true tragedy of the British officer in South Africa. Not just the physical hardships, but the slow erosion of humanity, the gradual acceptance of cruelty as necessity, the belief that some lives mattered less than others. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. As the war dragged on, the tents became a world unto themselves, a microcosm of British society transplanted to this alien soil. Here, amidst the dust and danger, they clung to the illusion of civilization. But outside, beyond the canvas walls, Africa waited, patient and eternal, watching as empires rose and fell, as men came with their guns and flags, only to vanish like morning mist beneath the relentless African sun. And in the end, when the last tent was struck and the last ship sailed for England's shores, what would remain? Only the veldt, stretching to the horizon, and the memory of a time when men in khaki dreamed of glory, sipped their tea, and tried to tame a land that would never truly be conquered. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. He had no rank, no badge, no boots, only silence, and a memory for tracks that ran deeper than ink. He was called Boy, though he was older than many of the men commanding him, a black scout, working for the very army that had long refused him dignity. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. He walked ahead of the troops, barefoot or in worn leather sandals, patched again and again with twine. The veldt spoke to him in broken reeds, in bent grass, in the faint scent of iron where blood had dried days ago. He could read it all. The path of a Zulu impi, the drag of a wounded ox wagon, the freshness of a dung pile to the British officers. This was native instinct. To him, it was ancestral knowledge, passed through generations of hunter and herder. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. ... He spoke little. That was the rule. English wasn't his language, and he'd learned that too many words could be mistaken for defiance. So he pointed, he nodded, he led, and the columns followed, through thorns, through gullies, through veldt that burned the soles, and bush that scratched the neck. He saved lives, ambushed before they were ambushed, found waterholes where none were marked. He even carried the wounded on his back when the wagons were too far behind. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. But when the war was done, when treaties were signed, and medals were pinned on starched uniforms, back in London, he received no mention. No letter, no coin, no monument beneath oak trees. He went back to his village, where drought still threatened the maize, where the land was shrinking, fenced by strangers in red coats. Perhaps he never spoke of it. Perhaps he sat quietly, watching the children play in dust, and wondering if they'd ever know how their father had walked through bullets to save men who never learned his name. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Even now, His story floats like dust between rocks and bones. No graves mark his rest. No newspaper told his tale. But in the rhythm of the veldt, in the call of the hadada, at sunrise, his legacy whispers softly. There were many like him. Trackers, porters, fighters, they bled quietly and vanished like smoke. But tonight, under this imagined sky, we remember him. Not for the war he fought, but for the silence he carried and the land he never left behind. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly and we rest beneath the stars. He knew the language of the earth, a tongue older than any spoken word. Each footprint told a story, each broken twig a chapter. In the whisper of wind through grass, he heard the approach of danger. In the flight of birds, he read the movements of men. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, missed nothing, not the faintest trail of dust, nor the slightest bend of a blade. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. He was a ghost in the bush, moving without sound, blending with shadow and light. The British soldiers marveled at his ability to appear and vanish like mist in the morning sun. But they never truly saw him, never understood the depth of his connection to this land. He was more than just a scout. He was the veldt itself, walking among them. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Dot, dot. In the heat of battle, when gunpowder choked the air, and men fell like wheat before the sight, he remained calm, his hands steady, his mind clear, guiding the troops through chaos. He knew every hill, every valley, every hidden path, where others saw only wilderness. He saw a map written in nature's hand. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. At night, when the camp fell silent, he'd sit alone, staring into the darkness. What thoughts passed behind those eyes? What memories of a life before the war, of family left behind, of a future uncertain we'll never know. His silence kept those secrets, buried deep like roots in African soil. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Years later, long after the guns fell silent, and the great powers had carved up the land, his legacy lived on. Not in history books or grand memorials, but in the stories whispered around fires, in the lessons passed from father to son, in the pride of a people who refused to be broken. He taught us that true strength lies not in conquest, but in connection to the land, to our ancestors, to ourselves. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. And so, as we sit here tonight, beneath this vast African sky, we honor him. Not with medals or monuments, but with remembrance, with gratitude for his sacrifice, with a promise to keep his story alive. For, in the end, it's not the generals or the politicians who shape the soul of a nation. It's the quiet heroes, the ones who walk barefoot through history, leaving no trace but the echoes of their courage. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. As dawn breaks over the veldt, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, we rise, carrying with us the weight of his story, the lessons of his silence, the strength of his spirit. We walk forward into a future he helped create but never lived to see. And in every step, in every breath of African air, we feel his presence, a Black Scout's silence, forever echoing in the heart of a nation. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The war did not only live in trenches or behind wire fences, it also brewed slowly, in canvas tents, flapping in the wind, beneath flags embroidered in gold, above wooden desks inked with power. In the heart of the officers' camp, there was calm, almost sterile, a strange quiet, as if war were merely a game of ink and orders. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The day began with tea, hot, fragrant, poured carefully from enamel kettles into cups with tiny cracks from the long journey over sea and sand. An officer might sip slowly, recording reports of skirmishes, noting the positions of the Boers, or signing requisition forms for rations, measured in tins and pounds, not in suffering or hunger. Behind him, an African aide stood silently, ready with more sugar or a clean cloth for the officer's boots. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The tents were arranged like a kingdom. Each officer had his space. His tent lined with books from home, a framed photograph of a wife in Pretoria or Johannesburg, and a revolver placed beside the bedroll. Just in case, some officers brought crystal flasks, playing phonographs that hissed soft music into the dry wind. Others smoked long pipes, watching smoke curls rise, as if they might escape the responsibility that weighed on their shoulders. They wrote letters. Dearest Elizabeth, the war drags on. The natives here are restless. I long for our veranda. Outside, the same natives dug graves for the fallen. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. War, for these men, was strategy, terrain, logistics, chess on sunburned soil. They debated rations. Not hunger, they noted attrition. Not heartbreak, they spoke of collateral. When children wasted away in concentration camps, they called it discipline. When women were beaten for hiding husbands, they called it progress. When kraals were torched, so nothing could remain. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. And yet, ... not all hearts were hardened. Some wrote diaries filled with guilt. Officers who had seen too much, who had heard the soft wails of infants at night, carried it in their bones long after the last shot was fired. A few returned home broken, their eyes unable to meet the mirror, their medals tucked away in drawers, never to see the light of day. But the machine of Empire ... rolled on. Tents were folded, flags lowered, and history was written with their names, not the names of those who suffered beneath their boots. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. In the official records, the British Empire pacified the Transvaal, but here under the vast African sky, we remember differently. We remember the hollow clang of empty pot, the black smoke over scorched homesteads, the quiet march of barefoot scouts, the endless cries in wire-bound loggers, and the quiet sipping of tea as it all unfolded ... just beyond the tent flap. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The veldt stretched endlessly, a sea of golden grass beneath an unforgiving sun. Here, amidst the whispers of history, the true cost of empire was etched into the very soil. In the officers' mess, talk turned to tactics and supply lines. Maps were unfurled, dotted with pins marking troop movements and Boer commandos. The language of war was clinical, detached. We'll need to increase patrols along the Orange River, a colonel might say, his finger tracing the blue line on parchment. The Boers are slipping through our net. Meanwhile, beyond the camp's perimeter, the veldt told a different story. Farmhouses stood abandoned, their windows dark and accusing. Cattle lowed mournfully in empty kraals. their owners long fled or captured. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The British brought their world with them. Cricket matches on hastily flattened patches of earth, formal dinners with polished silver, incongruous against the backdrop of war. Some officers even brought foxhounds, as if the veldt were nothing more than an oversized hunting ground. But reality had a way of intruding. The crack of a Mauser rifle in the distance, the acrid smell of gunpowder carried on the wind, the quiet sobs of a soldier writing his last letter home. In their tents at night, some officers wrestled with doubt. They had come to bring civilization, or so they told themselves. But the faces of starving children in the camps haunted their dreams. The cries of women separated from their families echoed in the stillness. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The war ground on, a relentless machine fueled by tea and telegrams. Orders came from London, crisp and clean, untouched by the dust and blood of the veldt. Implement a scorched earth policy, the missives read. Deny the enemy sustenance and shelter, and so the fires were lit. Farms burned, their smoke rising like dark pillars against the African sky. Fields of maize were trampled, orchards uprooted. The land itself became a casualty of war. In the camps, rows of white tents stretched to the horizon. Here, Boer women and children huddled, their eyes hollow with hunger and loss. British doctors moved among them, overwhelmed by the tide of disease and malnutrition. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Some officers tried to help. They smuggled extra rations to the camps, turned a blind eye to us, but the machine of empire was larger than any one man's conscience. In London, newspapers spoke of glory and the inevitable march of progress. Here, in the dust of Africa, such words rang hollow. The war changed those who fought it. Young subalterns who arrived full of patriotic fervor grew old before their time. Their letters home became terse, guarded. What could they say of the things they had seen, of the orders they had given? Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. As the conflict drew to its close, a strange quiet fell over the veldt. The guns fell silent. The smoke cleared, but the scars remained. Officers packed away their dressed uniforms and polished boots. They folded maps and sealed orders. Some looked back as they boarded ships for England, their eyes searching the horizon as if seeking absolution. But the veldt kept its secrets. The wind whispered stories that would never reach London's halls of power, of courage on both sides, of suffering beyond measure, of a land forever changed. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. In time, the tents were struck. The flags came down, but the echoes of empire lingered in the memories of those who survived, in the stories passed down through generations, in the very fabric of a nation born in the crucible of conflict. And so we remember, not just the battles and the generals, but the quiet moments, the weight of decisions made over teacups, the humanity that persisted, even in the darkest hours. For, in those moments, in the spaces between the lines of history books, we find the true story of empire, of tea and shadows, of power wielded and lives forever altered. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. The fire is low now, just embers, just hush. We've walked barefoot across the blistered earth of history. We've tasted the dust of forgotten tales, felt the hunger for untold stories, and heard the silence between heartbeats when memory nearly fades. We sat quietly with the elders of the village, watched as traditions clung to life. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. We followed the footsteps of ancestors, some revered, some forgotten all, woven into the tapestry of time. Let's pause here for a moment. Still laughter, still the soft hum of resilience read on the wind. We stood behind the veil of years that kept no story safe. We heard the whisper of ancient wisdom and the soft shuffle of barefoot grandmother scary knowledge in their hearts. And yet, in all this past, there was still song. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. To the traveler woe passed through and never asked what lay beyond the horizon. Even in forgetting, the soul reached backward to legends, to ancestors, to a world beyond our own. In lullabies whispered across generations, in eyes that still watch the horizon for the dawn of understanding. Let's pause here for a moment. History is often told through the names of kings, the dates of conquests, the monuments built with stone and pride. But tonight, we've told a different story. May your thoughts walk softly among the ghosts of the savannah, and may you rise tomorrow with the wisdom of those who once lived. We listened to the unnamed, to the barefoot child in a dusty schoolyard, to the village elder beneath a baobab's shade, and perhaps ... to the silence that lingers after the last tale is told. Your footsteps join those of countless others, leaving marks upon the earth that will speak to future generations. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Africa remembers, not just in books, but in wind and earth. In honoring those who came before, we pave the way for those yet to come. Let them guide your steps, inform your choices, and remind you of the depth of human experience that surrounds us all. You are part of a story as vast as the African plains, as enduring as the baobab tree. And so, as you sit here now, breathing soft under moonlight and sky, know that the past still breathes beside you. But each quiet name, each forgotten footstep, each fire that burned in silence was not in vain. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. May your journey tonight be gentle like the grass beyond the thorns. For history, too, needs rest, and so do you. Sleep well beneath this baobab sky. Let the echoes of the past cradle you, as the night wind whispers secrets older than time itself. Remember, as you drift into dreams, that you are part of this story now. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles softly, and we rest beneath the stars. In the morning, when you wake, carry with you the weight of these tales, for in understanding our past, we shape our future. And so, as the last ember fades, and the night sky embraces us, know that you are not alone. Let's pause here for a moment. May your sleep be filled with the wisdom of ages, and may you wake renewed, ready to add your own versetto, the endless song of humanity. For the story continues, with every breath, with every heartbeat, with every dawn, and you, dear listener, are its next chapter. Sleep now, and dream of tomorrow.